Sure.
You said the city's not handling the actual problem. Can you define the actual problem?
Yeah, so what we're doing is, it's like a three-part problem. Corey, I'm going to try to be brief. This will be hard, as you know.
I got a timer.
So the problem we have, first of all, is there's some great policy. The state limits us to do inclusionary housing. We have mechanisms like density bonus. The city has limited to transit-oriented development instead of allowing it throughout the city. That density bonus gives us a leverage where it does not come out of our pocketbooks, just as I said. So that's one. Second one is, again, incentives. Do not give these developers a financial incentive. Trust me, from working with them for 20 years, you tell them, sorry, the well has dried up. They're still going to want to come here. Thirdly, we got to start lobbying at the state, and we need to have stronger lobbyists that actually are using laws that have been adopted at the federal level. Those policies and laws can be implemented. We're a home rule city, everyone. You know we have stronger authority than the city wants you to know.
Mr. Boyd, looks like you were going to wrap this topic up.
All right, so I'm sorry, you go back to that. I thought I already answered this question.
He did.
Yeah, he's sorry.
I already filled in my next row.
Ah, there we go.
I'm ahead of myself.
No, I can talk some more.
This is the District 7 question. I'm going to shorten these to 1 minute because I'd like to get to a couple other questions. And I think it's fairly straightforward, and I may hit each of you on a follow-up. Just see how it goes. So District 7's on 86% increase in residents aged 55 to 64 years old in the years 2010. The cost of living in the city, including property tax assessments, has swelled. Many of these residents are facing the hard reality of being priced out of their neighborhoods. For some people, it's a desirable trade-off to live in a smaller space in their existing established neighborhood. Do you support relaxing the regulatory requirements to prevent homeowners from building accessory dwelling units, also known as granny flats or garage apartments? And it looks like, Mr. English, yours.
This is a rather lengthy question, but I think you're asking me if I support relaxing the requirements for accessory dwelling units. Is that the gist of the question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes and no. Currently there are provisions that allow that. Homeowners often have to ask for a variance. That's, in my opinion, appropriate because I think when you offer that as an option for a homeowner, you have to take into account the impact it's going to have on the neighborhood. There are restrictions on parking, on impervious cover that need to be observed. I'm not in favor of forcing that on a neighborhood. I know there's been some discussion on that, and I really think the character of neighborhoods deserves to be preserved. And I think neighborhoods should have some level of opt-in, opt-out on that. And there are options available for those currently now that want to build accessory dwelling units, granny flats.
I do have a follow-up on that one. Can you explain character of the neighborhood and how that would be negatively impacted? How adding a granny flat, and I'm coming from perspective half the houses on my streets have garage apartments. So we hear a lot about neighborhood character in certain circles around Austin, and I want to know how you describe that.
Well, it has to do with a lot of things, primarily the individuals that live there, the type of structures, the length of time the neighborhood's been in existence, the level of traffic on the streets. That's certainly an important part of the character of a neighborhood. What's the traffic flow through here? When you dramatically increase that, the character of the neighborhood changes. I think there's a lot of components that go into that. And I think you get your best description of what the character of the neighborhood is from the people that live there. And they're going to give you some slightly different definitions. But I do believe it's a facet of life within a particular geographic area that needs to be protected. And I do think that opening the door wide open to accessory dwelling units does carry with it some risk. And I think you have to consider how many people are going to live in that particular accessory dwelling unit, how many vehicles are going to be parked on the property, what hours, let's say they open it up to renters, it's a fairly young population. You can have any kind of noise control limitations, hour limitations on that. Those are all factors that play into the character of the neighborhood.
Can I ask one quick question? Sure. If those were young people and renters, don't they contribute to the character of the neighborhood?
They do. They're part of the neighborhood, but the neighborhood is more than just the recent arrivals. It's a part of the neighborhood is the families that have lived there for, in many cases, for several generations. And I am concerned that, as you mentioned, as a first part of that question, that older individuals are being forced out. The cost of living is rising so quickly that their fixed income or whatever income they have available is not able to keep up with that. And I don't like to see that happen. I think those neighborhoods are part of what makes Austin Austin.
And the source of that question is because doing some research on this, and I know Melissa saw this because she's on my neighborhood listserv. I reached out asking people for their experiences either as renters or as trying to build one. I easily have the responses I got with people in their 60s who were saying, I'm nearing retirement, I want to stay here, but I can't afford my house, I would love to stay in a great home. So these are personal anecdotes along with a citywide issue that is where this came from. So, Mr. Salazar.
And that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's not the mechanism, it's the usage. And I can speak to this person that I was talking about because I went to go see my neighbor that was my family's neighbors till we left for over 30 years. And I was dropping off signs, and our old home that I grew up in with my uncle and everybody else is literally been turned into a 4-dwelling entity. So when I was dropping off signs, we were talking about it. He goes, it was sure sad that it was this capacity and that the neighborhood character has been lost. But in the same token, I know people that are getting to that retirement age that are using this as a mechanism just to survive, just so they can have enough money in their retirement and stay where they're at. So looking at both sides of the coin, you can say it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but it's how that mechanism is being used in our neighborhoods. For some, it's an investment and they don't care about the quality. For some, it's an issue of survival. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You got to go case by case to see what it is.
Thank you. Ms. Gould?
I guess what I would say is we need to be flexible in understanding what different people need, and neighborhoods do turn over and change over time. I happen to live in a neighborhood off of on Shoal Creek where neighbors across the street and next door to me were original owners, and these homes were built in 1954. There is now some turnover with people leaving or moving into retirement homes and so forth. I don't get the idea that they were forced out, so I think they were able to hold on to their homes. I think that there are some neighborhoods where the granny flat, the accessory dwelling units would be welcome, and I think there are some areas where they absolutely would not. And a lot of the concern there would be how do you address cars and can you get people out of their cars so they don't have as many, which goes to the transit and the transportation issue.
Well, when I first moved out of my family home, I moved into an ADU, and it was helpful. It was great because it was affordable. Problem was, it was in the interior of a neighborhood, and I didn't have a car, and to walk to the bus stop in Cleveland in winter, let me tell you, is not pleasant when you have a far walk. And so then I had to move into an apartment, but the problem isn't so much relaxing the code, to get back to the question. It's more to do with the type of regulations we have here now and the placement of the dwelling unit. And I think that with the fire code and looking how to help people, a lot of these ADUs won't be as offensive to a lot of the people. And character of a neighborhood, I laugh, doing urban design, is making sure that that ADU looks similar to the rest of the neighborhood. But those neighborhoods are changing, so what is it at that moment? But we need to look at the code, and Code Next will allow that opportunity.
Mr. Boyd?
Well, as I said earlier, yes. I think, absolutely. I lived in the accessory dwelling unit when I was in law school, and my brother had a house that had one on 38th Street. These aren't being imposed on people. this is actually allowing people to use their property, in a way. Yes, there are valid neighborhood concerns that we need to look at, and perhaps we need to to try to balance some of those concerns by maybe limiting the number of accessory dwellings per block. I think we need to probably look at a residential parking program overall and how that fits in. One of the benefits of accessory dwelling units is that, unlike the situation with a short-term rental or another rental where you may not know, if there's an issue with the people who are next door, with accessory dwelling unit, generally the owner is living on site, and so you know exactly who to go to and how that can work. So it's an easy way to try to provide more affordability in the central city. Through these units, we need to really give it a look and give it a try, and maybe start with pilot programs and scale it up. But we definitely need to move forward. I think not waiting until Codex is done. That's the way to go.
Do you have, Brad, Stephen, do y'all have audience questions? Let's go ahead and move some of those. I still have more.
I have an audience question. Where do I turn it in?
Stephen can take it for you. All right. I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to give everybody 1 minute because I'd rather get through more of these than just fill time. Much of the district is made up of large residential neighborhoods that you have to leave to access retail, commercial, or to go to work. Do you support mixing uses within these primarily residential areas? If not, why? And if so, how would you encourage this? So it looks like, Mr. Salazar, you are first on this question.
Well, I think we have, number one, I don't think we should mix it to a capacity where it tears up traditional neighborhoods. I think we have already set up to a capacity where we have areas, particularly the districts having like the domain and all those issues. The issue, again, goes into connectivity. There's no reason why we can't have new development all over the domain in other areas that we segment as development centers, as long as we can get people to those capacities. When we stop doing that and we get involved in neighborhoods, that's when we hear the outcry from the neighborhood associations. That's when we get to a slippery slope. So we just need to connect and move outwardly, and we will be better for it.
Did you have a question?
Much of District 7 is made up of large residential neighborhoods that you have to leave to access retail or commercial areas, or to go to work. Do you support mixing uses within these primarily residential areas? If not, why? And if so, how would you encourage this?
Town center concept would mix the uses. What you're looking at is the growth circles like a tree in Austin from where it originally started downtown and then pushed north, south, east, and west. Rosedale is an older neighborhood. Allendale was a real suburb at one time. Where we have the corridors and where we currently have mixed use as far as retail and shopping and post offices and bus stops and so forth. I think we can do a better job of mixing the uses there. I would like to retain the interior parts of the neighborhoods. I don't know if I would necessarily call it the character of them, but to keep the kind of housing stock in there that people are accustomed to. And as the neighborhoods change and shift, we can see some additional shifts for uses within the neighborhoods.
Thank you.
So I think a great example that we could use that I know neighborhoods in the interior would be acceptable to, and then what they wouldn't. Many of you have been to Little Deli. There's a pizza shop, we have the Crestview Mini Max, and there's a barber shop and the pharmacy. And it's a low impact commercial development where you can walk up, fulfill your needs, the houses around there, and it's a community space, and it works. And something like that, I know for a fact, most of the residents are okay with. What they're not okay with are these stealth type dorms and these 4 or 5 story mixed use smacked in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And if you know how to work the code and how to implement it, it would be nice to be able to have something like that, to get out of your car, walk and have a cup of coffee, or sit and have a glass of wine with friends and not feel like you have to get in your car to go there, but you're also not infringing in the neighborhood. And here, the mindset is everything has to be big. We're doing mixed use, so we got to maximize it, and that's where you lose your character.
Where, I'm drawing a blank on 4 or 5 stories in neighborhoods.
That's what the concerns are with the residents, and I hate using Crestview, but this for you, like there's some commercial development, they want to go up, 3 stories. That's what is troubling the neighbors more so than the use itself. And it's now blending with the neighborhood. So allowing, I'm sure you've been to Little Deli's, correct?
It's an ice cream social.
Well, my point is that is a lower height, and I'm sure even if it was 2 stories, the residents wouldn't feel as impacted. It's the point once you start putting up to where they make almost like caverns or large structures in the middle of a residential. And what you're wanting to do is blend the commercial with the residential.
Yeah, I guess that's where I was curious as to examples of where that's happening in Austin, because it seems like everything is shoved to the major arterials, and it's even thought there. Case in point, the Chuck E. Cheese Ross disaster up on Burnett that the neighborhoods thought, which was going to be mixed use in apartments, and now it's going to be a Subaru dealership, which is not exactly an ideal alternative. So, Mr. Boyd, I believe it's your turn.
Yes, well, I mean, exactly. Build on the transit corridors. We can build on the transit corridors. We can build around transit stops, and we don't have to do the development into the core of the neighborhoods. There's a lot of anxiety and concern that somehow by talking about redeveloping the surface parking lot on a transit corridor suddenly implies that folks who are half miles in the neighborhood are going to see big tall buildings next to them. So we've got to give folks some reassurance around that. I'm not sure exactly how to go about that, but what we need to make our transit corridors work is a density of 20 units per acre within a quarter mile of each of the transit stops. We've got the 803 starting on Burnett in a couple of weeks. We've got the transit stops are there. The neighborhoods can shape what that density looks like, as long as we work. I think we work toward that optimal density of at least 20 units per acre, and that's certainly one of the things that we could be going for.
Quick question before I go to Mr. English. I don't mean to put Aaron on the spot, but would you consider Hyde Park to be a decent example of that, where you can walk to Antonelli's, you can walk to places, there's multifamily within the neighborhood? Does anyone else see that as a similar example of that?
I think that's a good example.
That's an example. So,
Just what I was talking about.
Well, I mean,
low and height.
I mean, I picked my house because I could walk to HEB. I can now walk to Lucy's. I walked over here. I can walk to Funny's. I can walk down this here. You can have choices.
do we think in general that Austin residents are averse to the Hyde Park model? Or do you think they maybe are a little reactionary out of the fear of we're going to start plopping down 360 buildings on Wood Road?
I mean, honestly, I think it's the fear of that. I think it's the fear of becoming more of like Rainy Street or Burnett or these capacities, because those are such prime examples. When you do have these entities like Little Deli or Crestview, those happen at such a almost innocent time that they believe that those times are lost and that you're going to get Rainy Street all over Austin and nobody wants to have that. You know?
But Rainy Street. I'll let you go ahead and answer.
No, that's all right.
I was going to say,
I just open it up there, so I would be polite and not just jump in. I'm sort of waiting for you.
The Bebex used to be a dairy farm, so it was green space, but now it's developed. And I guess I see these things as, evolutionary. So, but Mr. English, I'm going to give you your 1 minute to go ahead and address this question.
Well, and again, the question started on the other end, so I'm really not going to have a whole lot to say that you haven't already heard. You define some of these neighborhoods as large. I guess that's kind of a relative term. To me, they're not necessarily large, and you mentioned having to leave the neighborhood to go to work. I think for the vast majority of residents in any neighborhood, they're going to have to leave the neighborhood to go to work unless they happen to work at some business establishment on the periphery of it. So I'm not sure that there's much of any kind of change that's going to occur there. What I do believe that with most of the major arterials and secondary streets that run through the neighborhoods, most of them have options either currently, in fact, I think it's all of them have options currently available through zoning to build businesses that are relatively close to the perimeter of the neighborhood. So distance from the neighborhood to an eatery, a dry cleaner, it's really not all that dramatic or that long to begin with.
As related to that in the corridors, we do run into the issue of compatibility as we try to go up on those corridors, and this, the effect that single-family zoning and single-family dwellings have on buildings. So when those compatibilities for height restrictions kick in, is anybody looking to release that restriction a little bit so that you can go higher if you want to keep everything towards the corridors?
Well, in sitting in, I guess that's directed at me.
Sure.
In sitting in on neighborhood associations for years, and particularly more concentrated listening experience in recent months, I found most of the neighborhoods understand that change is inevitable. It's just a matter of managing it, trying to find some happy medium. And most of the folks that get into this topic with me or in neighborhood association meetings understand that there will be some need for additional height and structures along the transportation corridors. They just want some limits on what that is. They don't want a 7 or 8 story building, 4 stories or less. There's some room to negotiate here.
Okay. This next one's a transit question that was submitted from the audience, but I think it's a good one. In the transport industry, bus rapid transit usually includes dedicated bus lanes for the entire length of the bus route. Would you support or favor bus-only lanes for the entire run of the 801 on Lamar Guadalupe all the way to South Park Meadows and the 803 on Burnett? So Ms. Poole, you're number one.
I ride the 801 sometimes from the Triangle down to my office at the courthouse, and sometimes from there down to SoCo for lunch. And so the streets right outside my door, Guadalupe and Lavaca, have the dedicated lanes. And I can tell you that it has helped the traffic congestion for that segment that goes downtown. I just don't know how, and I actually engaged this question with Cap Metro folks when I met with them a couple of weeks ago, how would you go about extending the dedicated lane all the way north and all the way south? And they didn't actually have an answer. I don't think they're looking at doing that. I think it ends up being super expensive, and it displaces the other cars, and there are areas where it's just so narrow, it's down to 2 lanes. There really isn't a place. Like, you couldn't take out a sidewalk and the utility poles and bury all of that and grab some easement. I just don't think that the structure that we have would allow that to happen.
I don't not sure either, but in discussions I've had with them, they tend to lay it at the city's feet and say the city owns the road, the city owns the signals, not our problem. So let's work under that assumption that the city is all powerful.
Okay.
Do this. So how do you feel about it in that case?
Well, about 10 years ago when Daryl Slusher was on council, I don't know how many of you remember Daryl, remember the synchronizing of the traffic lights downtown? That actually was a big effort. It was something the city had never done before. It was super expensive, but now we don't even realize that happened, and those streets are a little bit easier to pass, not always, but generally speaking, if you're going 25 miles an hour, you don't have to stop the red light every time you go. So that worked in the grid downtown, and they had to do a lot of tweaking to make that work. I think they could do a traffic study and figure out how much it would cost. Evidently, it's quite expensive. I don't know the cost, but that would be another decision for the city to make. Is that trade-off one that you want to make?
So, sitting on the Technical Advisory Council at Campo, we have those conversations with Cap Metro and with the City of Austin and our local jurisdictions. And the thing with Lamar is we have wider or extra right-of-way easements than other areas. So it could be done, but you really need buy-in from the public. It's a little bit more difficult as you move farther north. And I think as they start to see what happens, the dedicated lane just came in just in the last couple months downtown, and we're starting to watch how that is. And I think that buy-in will come as we see it operate. It's still very choppy, and you find cars in the dedicated bus lanes, and then there's problems and horns going. So it's not smooth yet downtown, but I anticipate that once they see it moving and the crinkles, that we might incrementally move up, and Cap Metro has been talking about it.
Well, regardless of what happens with the rail election this fall, taking on expanding the dedicated lanes on Guadalupe, Lamar, on those existing routes, it's definitely something we've got to take on. West Campus, through the drag, is one of the big challenges, and but it's sort of a question. How's it going to work? Some people talk about moving the buses a little closer to West Campus. Other people talk about moving the cars more to West Campus. I think there are ways to do it. It's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be easy. You need to look at how to do that. Going north of 29th, 35th Street, very constrained right away, and so very challenging. Going down South Congress is a great opportunity, and there might be some real feasibility and possibilities there. Definitely something we need to take on and put it near the top of our agenda for next year.
Well, if you believe that a bus system is part of the solution, then a dedicated bus lane certainly has to be something you want to try to advocate for and push for and use wherever possible.